Hello, it's Matthew David, and I want to make this because I feel, now notice I said I feel coming from the senses, my tuning fork, my five senses have tuned into this fear surrounding money. And I want to clean that up, and I want to heal the brokenhearted as it pertains to money. Now, I say the brokenhearted because money represents support. It represents sufficiency, provision, protection, and promotion in the realm of the five senses. So living in world consciousness, material consciousness, the superstition of reality, money represents your proof in society. It represents your ability to provide, protect, and to be a blessing. I find it interesting that when you offer this up and you surrender it to God, to the gospel, to the teaching that says, if you shall lose your life for Christ, you shall gain it. But if you shall cling to your life, you shall surely lose it. I find it interesting. My life scripture, Romans 8:10, that says, and if Christ be in you, then the body is dead because of sin, but the spirit is life because of righteousness. You see, the parallels here are that spirit is the real, and the body is dead because of sin. You see, the body is the metaphor for the five sense reality, for the physical world, for the symbol of prosperity that you hold in your hand. It is dead because of sin. It's the world of the dead. And God says, prove me now, in Malachi 3:10, that I shall not open up the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing so much so that you can't contain it. You see, when you offer up your temptation to the five sense reality, to serve mammon, that means to serve your treasures as gods, false idols, coming from fiction, from the world of the dead. When you surrender up what belongs to God, God said the 10% belongs to me. When you surrender that to the faith message, because that's the gospel, the faith message is the gospel, the divine recognition that you are forever and always supported in spirit. You never had a material life. You never had a material life. Never. Not for one moment. So when we offer up the false idol of money in exchange for more of God's presence, it's a heart condition. That's why I said heal the brokenhearted. Because God hasn't given you a spirit of fear. God has given you the spirit of peace, love, joy, and of a sound mind. That's the fruit of the Spirit. Your true identity is in spirit, not in material consciousness. So when we get that jolt of adrenaline in our body, when we take money and we hand it over because of the fear that arises from the five senses, that biochemical, hormonal sense of loss comes from the broken heart. It comes from when you felt let down, unsupported, unloved, maybe even uncared for in life, through a false interpretation that your five senses made. Whatever story you've been believing and speaking and living in the belief of regarding your life, the truth about this is that it's all fiction. You never left heaven. Your life is God's life. You're forever in God's care. And as this is the truth, you never had to take thought or worry about what you shall eat, what you shall wear. God knows of all these needs, and yet God is knowing nothing about needing anything, because God is all in all sufficiency, all prosperity, all abundance. God is all in all. So when we break our attachment to our material substance and we go counterintuitive to that fear, that adrenaline spike, and that feeling of loss, when we surrender up to the God of this world, mammon, money, God is saying, prove me that I will not open up the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing, so much so that there's not room enough to contain it. God meets you in the space where your faith reaches out like an invisible hand to a loving Father that has been brokenhearted because of a projection in consciousness, a feeling of being unsupported, unprovided for, uncared about, rejected, abandoned, abused. And what you're doing with the tithe is you are going counterintuitive. When you do that with the tithe, you are going counterintuitive into the solution by making the faith covenant a reality, and that changes you. That brings restoration to you. Because when the tithe begins to support you outside of your knowledge, the knowledge of your five senses, the story that you live under the spell of, you begin to wake up from that dream, because God's character is unfailing. Unlike an earthly father that let you down, or an earthly mother that failed to nourish you, God has no flaws. And the only way for you to demonstrate that perfection is to make that connection through that covenant and come under that protection, that promotion, and that provision. And it heals the broken heart. It heals the very condition that creates the poverty consciousness. And eventually, like Jesus, if you give up all for God in the wisdom of knowing that God is the only presence, power, and mind, you shall surely gain your life if you lay it down for Christ. You don't have to lay down all of it. You can start with the 10% that God has commanded, and God will be restored in its proper perfection by removing the very thing that is casting a shadow, the Adam dream of consciousness. It's all fear. All of that thinking and all of that worry and all of that self-care is all fear. And clinging to the symbols of prosperity is to believe in the idea of finite supply. And if you believe in an idea of finite supply, you cannot, by the very notion of making it finite, believe in infinite supply at the same time. God is the infinite one, and what you cling to through the five senses is the finite. So if you cling to the finite, it cannot be in the blessing, because it is not the infinite one. So when you surrender up what is finite, you receive what is infinite in exchange, trading in the old material mind, consciousness, the superstition of materiality. You trade that in for the recognition that God is all in all, the source of all good things. And it is unfailing. The blessing has already been poured out. And there was never any problem meeting any need, because God is knowing nothing about any lack or any need. So as you surrender up what is finite, when you surrender up what is finite, you become more infinite. And as you become more infinite, it means you demonstrate more of God's presence, because God is the infinite and the one and the zero. The infinite one is the one and the zero. It's symbolic. So the 10% means that you are surrendering up what is finite and receiving the infinite one. And the 10 is to put it in plain sight where the five senses will never see it, because they clothe everything in sin through a material consciousness. But when you are to bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, it means you are to bring the infinite one into your presence. So as you surrender up through the five senses the knowledge of the tithe being the 10th, you take the substance at hand and you break the sacred 10th, and you give that to where you receive your spiritual nourishment, because your heart is after the infinite one. Then you are bringing the whole tithe, you are bringing the whole infinite one into the storehouse. A storehouse is where all of the supply is kept. The storehouse is where you keep the goods. So bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Your material-minded consciousness, through the hypnosis of the superstition of materiality, takes the 10% of the symbol of wealth in the world of fiction and tithes it into the covenant where the gospel is meeting you. This is the gospel of truth, that God is the source of all good things, and to lay down your life for God is to gain your life. That means to lay down what you think is the God of this world, your money, and to tithe it to where you receive this message. You are bringing the whole tithe into the storehouse, because the 0 and the 1 is the infinite one, and you are surrendering the finite amount in order to receive the infinite one in your consciousness. And that is the divine faith covenant explained. Listen to this again several times until you clearly recognize what you have heard. Selah.